In other news, convicted fraudster J. Arthur Brown has been released on parole. He was running the firm Fidential when 1.4 billion rand in funds administered by the firm disappeared. He was initially given a suspended sentence and a fine of 150,000 rand, but ultimately he was sentenced to 15 years behind bars. And the judge said the judge who heard the original case was in fact deserving of censure. To discuss, we're now joined by Correctional Services Spokesperson Singabakho Nxumalo. We're also joined by the Deputy Parliamentary Officer for the trade union umbrella body Cosatu, that's Tony Ehrenreich. In 2014, he said that the sentence should serve as a clear indication to fund managers that they're going to be put in jail for corruption and for stealing from the poor. Mr. Nxumalo, let me start with you from Correctional Services. Remind us of the rules here. So in 2014, he got 15 years. Why is he out on parole just 7 years later?
Thank you for giving us the opportunity. We have indeed confirmed that Mr. Joseph Arthur Brown has been placed on parole, and we've cited Section 73 of the Correctional Services Act, which makes it very clear that any inmate after serving the minimum detention period is due to be considered for a parole placement. Parole consideration doesn't guarantee that a person is to be then placed out. Hence, we've also indicated that he was considered previously, but he was not placed on parole because there were other programs that he still needed to finish, and there were other programs that were recommended. He then did all those. Hence, then when the parole board met again, they then felt that he does meet all the requirements and that he is fit to be placed out on parole, but there are conditions attached to him.
All right, let me come to you, Mr. Ehrenreich. Just any comment on him being released on parole? He has spent time in prison. Do you think what has happened is a deterrent for other white-collar criminals? You're muted, sir. Please unmute.
Apologies.
No problem.
Well, clearly it's not a deterrent. One of the most profitable businesses in South Africa at the moment is to steal money, and J. Arthur Brown and the Fidential issues of Marco Jooste are examples of how white-collar crime is ripping the society apart. But what the Correctional Service is doing is they're discrediting the entire system. 7 years for having stole hundreds of millions of rands, plunging widows and orphans into destitution, completely destroying those people's lives, and he walks away with what is effectively a slap on the wrist. The previous judge, nothing's happened to him. Clearly, the censure was not applied. So the legal system in South Africa, given the unfolding events, is going to be entirely discredited. And pretty soon, poor people are going to see that the rich gets away with a slap on the wrist, while minor offences for the poor sees them incarcerated for extended periods. And this is not addressing the problem.
Let's throw this to Mr. Nxumalo. So you're saying it's a slap on the wrist. Just first, Mr. Ehrenreich, quickly explain that, because Correctional Services is saying this is what the law says. He is eligible for parole and he has met all the conditions.
Well, 7 years for stealing 100 million rand is clearly not acceptable, and there's no consideration shown for the victims of that theft. But the law must be mindful of the fact that its sentences must serve as a deterrent. 7 years is not going to serve as a deterrent. So if this is the way in which the law is structured, and if you have the systems and the legal advice and all of the other mechanisms at your disposal, then you'll walk away after a very short period of time. And that's not going to stop this plague of white-collar crime that's spreading across our country. The officials, the institutions of government must act more decisively.
Mr. Nxumalo, any response from you on that? And what does Correctional Services look at? You said he met the terms, but I mean, these were victims, like he says. They were the widows and orphans of mine workers who were killed. They were the beneficiaries of some of that funds, some of those funds that went missing. Do you consider things like that and how contrite he is?
Correctional Services is at the tail end of the criminal justice system. We don't get involved in court processes where a person gets to be prosecuted and the judgment eventually handed down. What then comes to us is a warrant of detention specifying the offense that a person has committed and the sentence that is to be served. We then admit a person through what we call a correctional sentence plan in terms of how are we going to go about correcting the offending behavior, then rehabilitate that particular person. And I've cited Section 73 of the Correctional Services Act, which is very clear in stating that every inmate after serving the minimum detention period must be considered for parole and placement. That doesn't mean that placement is guaranteed, but it's a consideration. There is quite a number of variables that we look at, and parole placement is not the end of a sentence. If a person is given 15 years and you've served 7 years inside, you will have to serve the remainder of that sentence outside if that parole placement is then confirmed. Hence, we even attach conditions that a person will need to comply with up until
very quickly, Mr. Nxumalo, where is he now and what are the conditions? Presumably, he is not allowed to engage in financial services, we hope.
We do not disclose parole conditions to the public because those are between the parolee and the correctional services. But yes, there are conditions that which are standard in terms of not having to be found in conflict with the law, as there are substances that a person cannot consume, and you are expected to report at a particular time either at our offices or our officials will go to your household. So there's a number of conditions that gets to attach to a person, but we do not disclose those to the public. But what we ensure is that our monitoring officials will have to make it a point that all of them are adhered to, because should there be a violation of those conditions, unfortunately, we need to act, which may mean that a person needs to be taken back to our correctional center.
All right, Mr. Ehrenreich, your final comment. It's a pity we don't know those conditions and what sort of financial dealings he could engage in. But as a society, should we be merciful and say that people can change?
Of course, people can change, and we must consider that in the process. But what we have here is clearly somebody who's been incredibly corrupt, who's destroyed other people's lives, hundreds and thousands of people who's been affected, and you can't just get to serve the minimum services with some luxury conditions. We are the public. We are the custodians. Government acts on our behalf. So how can information be denied us, and how can we see the system's credibility being reduced by correctional services applying the law in such a way where it doesn't appear rational and doesn't respond to the needs of the society? So this is entirely unacceptable from correctional services, from our legislatures, but most of all from those white-collar criminals who are plaguing our society and getting away with a slap on the wrist. There's got to be much more done to defend the interest of poor people, and where they are disadvantaged to the extent that they are here, that proper commiseration and compensation is provided to them from the affected parties.
All right, thank you for your time tonight. That was Correctional Services Spokesperson Singabakho Nxumalo and Deputy Parliamentary Officer for the trade union umbrella body Cosatu, Tony Ehrenreich.